This isn't just a story, it's a cry from the soul of nature. Listen carefully, something wild is about to speak. For hours his voice had echoed through the wilderness like a ghost crying out for salvation, but only the trees answered. They didn't reply with concern or even acknowledgement. Instead, the wind carried his voice away, scattering it like dry leaves across the icy ravine where he lay, broken and forgotten. The pines loomed above him like silent witnesses, unmoved by his suffering. Tom's body, curled and half buried in snow at the base of the jagged slope, shivered violently. One leg jutted out at an impossible angle, twisted beneath layers of soaked denim and blood-streaked ice. He had fallen, no, he had been taken, swallowed by the frozen wilderness of Montana's backcountry. What was once a crisp winter day had become a white tomb, sealing him off from the world. His phone had shattered like brittle bone on impact. No signal, no screen, no hope. And so he lay there, the warmth bleeding from his body and soul alike, whispering his last words to a sky that didn't care. But then something moved. Not the wind, not his mind, real, quiet, a figure emerged from the tree line. Silent as snowfall, not a rescuer, not a bear. A bobcat, not charging, not fleeing, just standing there. Watching, the Lord is near to the broken-hearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit. That verse stirred in Tom's memory, unbidden. As he blinked against the snowflakes clinging to his lashes, he felt it, not warmth, not safety, but presence. And sometimes presence is more powerful than rescue. An animal is calling, will you answer? Because sometimes the wild doesn't just witness your pain, it answers. She didn't run. That was the first miracle. The bobcat stood still, her golden eyes locked on Tom's half-conscious face, as if she saw something deeper than his injuries. No threat in her muscles, no hunger in her gaze. Just, awareness. He tried to speak, but his lips cracked, the words frozen in his throat. Are you real? He rasped, barely audible. She blinked slowly, once, deliberately. His training as a combat medic had taught him to read a situation fast, danger, safety, deception. But this defied protocol. After 3 decades in war zones, cradling dying soldiers and whispering final prayers to broken bodies, he thought he knew death. But death had never looked like this. She was no hallucination. Her coat blended with the frost-kissed earth, ears tipped black. Her silhouette framed in nature's silence like a painting that had waited years for someone to notice. Tom realized with a jolt that he wasn't afraid of her. He was afraid of not feeling anything anymore. And somehow, her gaze stirred a ripple inside, a heartbeat he thought had gone dormant. Even the wilderness and desert will be glad in those days. The wasteland will rejoice and blossom with spring crocuses. It wasn't spring, not yet, but something had begun to thaw. Not in the weather, but in him. Humans are waiting. Prepare yourself for the wild to change your heart. He hadn't come to these mountains seeking healing. He came to vanish. After his wife, Eleanor, had slipped from his arms into death's embrace. Not quickly, but slowly, painfully, over 2 relentless years of cancer, Tom had stopped seeking meaning. He had poured everything into her care. Every breath, every prayer, every ounce of hope. And when she was gone, there was nothing left in him worth saving. The house they had built together became a mausoleum of memories, every photograph an open wound, every echo a ghost. Friends called. He didn't answer. Family visited. He didn't open the door. Until one day, he simply packed a bag, got in his truck, and drove north. No map, no destination. Just Glacier National Park and a silent scream that needed to vanish into the pines. This wasn't a hike. It was a surrender. But now, as the snow pressed into his back and the pain in his leg blurred into numbness, the stillness didn't feel like peace. It felt like punishment, yet still she watched the bobcat. Still there, a soul of the wild refusing to abandon him. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. In that moment, Tom understood. He had sought silence, but silence hadn't answered. The wild had. Not all rescues come with sirens. Some arrive on 4 silent paws in the loneliest hour when no one else is coming. As darkness draped the mountains in deeper blue and black, the temperature fell with cruel indifference. Tom's body trembled violently, every muscle spasming in a desperate bid to generate heat. His vision wavered. His hands, once steady under fire, now curled uselessly against his chest, but the Bobcat hadn't left. She hadn't blinked out of existence like a dream. She stayed, pacing slowly, drawing circles in the snow as if tracing the boundary between this life and the next. She sat only 15 feet away, her breath visible in the frigid air, her body upright, alert. Tom didn't know if she was guarding him or simply keeping vigil, but her presence was no accident. It was sacred. He will cover you with his feathers, and under his wings you will find refuge. She had no wings, but somehow this creature of tooth and claw had become his angel. When he closed his eyes again, he imagined Eleanor beside him, not speaking, just watching too, just being. For the first time in 2 years, Tom wept, not from pain, not from fear, but because in the heart of the frozen wild, he didn't feel invisible anymore. Someone, something, had seen him. A viral YouTube story begins not with a roar, but with a whisper between man and wild, captured in the moment before life surrenders. Night passed like a fever dream. Tom drifted in and out of consciousness, haunted by memories and half-formed prayers. He didn't know when sleep took him. All he knew was that every time he awoke, the Bobcat was still there, a spectral guardian cloaked in snowlight. Once he swore she crept closer, just a few feet more, as if drawn by his breath or the faint tremble of his spirit. Morning came not with sun, but with gray hush. And in the coldest hour, just before dawn, he heard it, footsteps, voices, a search party. Hikers had reported a truck abandoned at a trailhead. Rescue teams followed the tracks. The Bobcat slipped away then, silent as she'd arrived, vanishing into the frost-laced forest. She didn't need thanks. She wasn't his pet or his fantasy. She was wild truth. Who teaches us more than the beasts of the earth and makes us wiser than the birds of the heavens? They found Tom barely alive, but he lived, and he told them about the Bobcat. Some believed him, others smiled politely, but Tom knew that animal had given him back something more valuable than time. She gave him a reason to come home. This isn't a story about survival. It's a testimony to what happens when the wild sees something broken in you and chooses to stay. The moon painted her in silver. The Bobcat stood at the edge of the trees, haloed in soft, ethereal light, as if nature itself had framed her in reverence. She looked at him, no movement, no sound, just her eyes burning in the cold like lanterns in the dark. Then she was gone. The air shivered in her absence, and Tom blinked at the emptiness, unsure if she had ever been there at all. Was this a mercy from his dying mind? One last vision before the dark wrapped him up for good? By morning he wasn't sure if he was still alive or simply dreaming the final scenes. The sky above had turned the color of ash, dim and distant. Trees stood crusted in white like ancient skeletons, and the frost clung to everything, even his eyelashes. His body was pain-wrapped in skin. Lips split, mouth parched, toes numb. He was no longer part of the world, but lingering just outside of it. For a moment, he almost welcomed it. The end, the stillness, just close his eyes and vanish like he'd always intended. Then scraping, a sound not born of wind or trees, but of something deliberate, something real. His eyes opened, slow and aching, and there she was. The Bobcat, real, alive. Returning not with menace, but with something clenched between her teeth, his pack. She dragged it through the snow like a determined traveler, pausing with short bursts to catch traction. She stopped beside him and dropped the strap near his hip. She didn't sniff it, didn't investigate. She just looked at him, eyes full of something ancient and unreadable. Inside that pack was a metal thermos. Tom had sealed it before the fall. It still held lukewarm tea liquid warmth life. Even the beasts of the field honor me. Why had she done this? She was wild, untamed. She owed him nothing. And yet, here she was, returning what he needed most, not instinct, not accident, choice, and in that choice Tom felt a flicker. of something long dead, faith, somewhere in the wilderness. Between silence and death, a bond was born, not of words or ownership, but of sacred understanding. He had nothing left but breath, and even that came at a cost. The forest after dark was no longer gentle, it had teeth. The temperature dropped like a falling blade, and Tom's body was little more than a sack of brittle bones and shattered nerves. His injured leg pulsed with dull fire, a reminder of how close he sat to the edge. He tried to reach for his bag, his trembling fingers dragging it closer in slow jerks. If he could unscrew the thermos, sip just a little, maybe it would be enough to survive the night. But then came the sound, low, distant, wrong, a howl carried on the wind, not far. Not alone, another call answered from behind. Then a third, much closer. The kind of sound that turned air to ice inside your lungs. Wolves? Coyotes? He couldn't tell, and it didn't matter. Something was circling, and he couldn't move. He was bait on snow, bleeding and broken. He turned his head. Just as the bobcat rose, her stance changed. Gone was the passive watcher. Now she was alert, body taut like a drawn bow, tail twitching low, ears pointed forward. The same animal that had dragged his bag had transformed into something ancient and dangerous. She stepped toward the sounds, fluid as breath, no fear. Number. Hesitation. And then, just like that, she disappeared into the black underbrush. The righteous are bold as a lion. She went into the dark, not for food, not for flight, but for him. Then came the chaos. Not a single growl. Not one bark. But many, brief, violent, crashing, yelping, snarling. A storm of sound that tore through the underbrush, then ended as quickly as it began. Silence again. Just the trees whispering secrets, and Tom paralyzed by more than cold. Had she survived? Had she fallen to protect him? He didn't know. And that waiting, that not knowing, was a new kind of agony. This isn't just about a bobcat. It's about what remains when all hope is gone, and something wild chooses you anyway. She returned. Of course she did. She always came back. Her figure emerged from the trees like a vision half-born of smoke. Slower this time, her steps heavier, not limping but clearly worn. Her coat was dusted with frost and dirt, and something darker streaked her shoulder, a wound. Tom couldn't tell if it was a bite, a scratch, or both, but the fact she was walking meant something had lost against her. She circled once, not anxious, not proud. Then she lowered herself beside him, not to warm him, not to seek comfort, but to stay, not beside his body but beside his presence. As if she knew this wasn't about survival anymore. It was about soul. Two are better than one. For if either of them falls, the one will lift up his companion. Tom turned his head, ever so slightly, the movement burning through his neck. He couldn't look at her directly, but he didn't need to. He could feel her, hear her soft breathing. In rhythm with his broken heartbeat, the forest held its breath. The night passed not in silence, but in connection. He wasn't dying alone, and neither, somehow, was she. Even the coldest night breaks eventually, but only some awaken to. Find their souls still intact, carried by the wild's mercy. By the third sunrise, Tom no longer shivered. And that terrified him more than the pain ever had. Shivering meant life, heat, resistance, but now his body had surrendered, numb and slow. His mind drifted. He blinked up at the pale sky, watching. Flakes of snow tumble like feathers from heaven. He could barely feel his own hands. Somewhere deep, his leg throbbed with a final pulse, then dulled. He was slipping. He knew it, the bobcat was gone. Not a trace. No paw prints in the fresh snow, no breath on the breeze. She had left like all wild things do, without a goodbye. He searched the trees anyway, scanning every shadow for golden eyes. Nothing, even hope had fallen silent. His thirst had become unbearable. He had rationed the thermos, sipping once the day before, but now it was empty. His lips were cracked, his tongue heavy. He couldn't call out. Didn't want to. There was no point. The wolves had gone. The cold had returned. Stillness. Just stillness. My strength is dried up like a potsherd, and my tongue sticks to the roof of my mouth. He whispered a final thought, barely sound, more breath than words. Guess that's it." The ache in his chest was no longer panic, it was resignation. His heart stuttered once. Then again, slower, he closed his eyes. Letting go wasn't scary anymore. It was quiet. Sometimes when all prayers go silent, the answer comes on. Heavy boots in snow, carrying hope in human skin. But nature wasn't done, not yet. A sound broke the stillness. Crunch, a boot step, then another, heavier than pause. Different rhythm, voices, faint at first, like music underwater. Then clearer. Louder. "Did you see that?" One said. "She looked at me, then just walked away." "Like she led us here," another replied. "I told you something's out here." Tom's lungs fought for breath. He wanted to cry out, to raise an arm, anything but his body refused. Only a ragged exhale escaped, but the voices came closer. Shadows crossed above him, a gasp. "Oh my God. There's someone here." Hands, warm hands. On his face, his neck, his wrist, a radio crackled. More voices followed. And in the chaos of rescue, he caught one final sentence. "There was a bobcat, I swear. She looked right at me." Then disappeared. Tom's tears spilled freely. Uncommanded, he couldn't speak, didn't need to. Because he knew she had stayed with him, she had fought for him. And in the end, she had brought them to him. You will be called sought after, the city no longer deserted. And though she was gone, her miracle remained. In the snow, in his breath. In his life returned, the forest was frozen in its breathless slumber. A cathedral of snow-covered limbs and sky-piercing pines. And then real hands, warm voices, human. They broke through the silence like the first note of a forgotten song. At the tree line she was gone. No whisper of fur, no glint of eye. The bobcat had vanished like smoke on the wind, but what she left behind was undeniable. A miracle. A young couple, breath caught in clouds of frost, trembling not from the cold, but from the weight of something ancient they couldn't name. Hikers from Vancouver, bundled in mismatched gloves and second-hand coats, had only come to witness the sunrise cresting over Glacier's ridges. They hadn't meant to step off the trail, they hadn't meant to find anything but silence. But then she appeared. The woman could barely speak, her voice thin and shaking like the ice-laced branches above. "She just stepped onto the path," she said. "We froze, I thought she was going to charge. But she didn't even growl." Her partner nodded, eyes still wide with disbelief. She just looked at us like she was waiting, and she had. The bobcat hadn't fled, hadn't snarled or crouched. She turned, took a few slow steps, then looked back. That was the invitation they followed. Do not forget to show hospitality to strangers, for by so doing some have entertained angels without knowing it. She led them not as prey leads predator, but as guide leads pilgrim. Always a few paces ahead, always watching. The path twisted through ice-cracked roots and shallow snowdrifts, but she never faltered. When they hesitated, unsure, she would stop too, turn, eyes fixed, waiting. It wasn't fear that gripped the hikers now, it was reverence. The forest felt changed, every tree a sentinel, every footfall a prayer, and then they saw him. Half buried. In snow, curled like a fallen leaf against a drift. Skin pale, lips the color of bruised berries. At first they thought he was dead, but then he stirred just barely when they touched his shoulder. "You found me," he whispered, voice cracked, with cold and disbelief. He looked past them, past the treetops, and into the endless silence where she had been. Not a hallucination, not a dream. A guardian, an answer. They wrapped him in emergency blankets, one whispering soft words to keep him conscious, while the other climbed the hill in desperate search of a signal. The moment they made contact with rescue, the forest shifted again, from graveyard to sanctuary. The thud of helicopter blades soon replaced the wind, but not a single paw print remained. She had come, she had stayed, she had saved him. And, like mist burning off in sunlight, she was gone. The righteous care for the needs of their animals, but the kindest acts of the wicked are cruel. They called it luck. They called it coincidence. But Tom, the man she had led them to, knew better. She hadn't stumbled across him. She hadn't just happened to cross the hiker's path. She had made a decision. And in doing so, she had altered the fabric of two human lives. And perhaps, something older still, a month passed, his bruises faded. The frostbite receded. The cast came off, and he walked again, though slower, with a cane. But healing had its limits. The pain in his leg was nothing compared to the ache in his chest, the one born of memory and mystery. Each night, just before sleep pulled him under, he saw her eyes, golden, unreadable, wise, not wild, not tame, just other. He told no one. How could he? They would call it trauma, survival fantasy, but he knew, he remembered. He remembered the way she looked back to be sure, the way her body tensed when they paused, the quiet urgency in her silence. She had chosen him. And now it was his turn. He had to go back. Not to say thank you, that was too small, but to honor the bond. Some debts can't be repaid, but you try anyway. Before they call, I will answer. While they are still speaking, I will hear. Dawn kissed the horizon the day Tom returned to Glacier. No fanfare, no press. No gear but a small backpack and the quiet vow stitched into his bones. He didn't take the main trail. He followed memory instead. That slope where he slipped, that ridge where she stood like an omen. The path wasn't marked, but it lived. In his muscles, in the shadows of the trees. At last he reached a clearing rimmed with frost, so thick it glittered like stardust. He knelt there beside a mound of stones, placed the raw meat down gently in the snow, an offering, not bait. Not a lure. A gesture of acknowledgement, respect. Then he sat on a stone, breath fogging, eyes soft, and he waited. The forest was silent. No crunch of paw, no whisper of brush. But he didn't expect her to come, not today. He didn't need her to. The act was enough to be here. To say without saying, I remember, I believe. After some time, he stood, nodded once to the trees, and walked away. Leaving not just food, but a piece of his soul behind. The wind blows where it wishes. You hear its sound, but you cannot tell where it comes from or where it goes. A week passed. He returned. Same path, same chill. The pain in his leg flared sharp in the cold, but he welcomed it. It reminded him of why he was still breathing. The mountains were quiet, no tourist, no trailside chatter. Just wind and wilderness and a memory that tugged him onward. The clearing welcomed him back like a sacred chamber, wrapped in a fresh snowfall that shimmered beneath the rising sun. The meat was gone, nothing else disturbed, just the whisper of something unseen. He sat against a wide pine, pulled his knees close and breathed. And then movement, subtle, peripheral, a ripple in the stillness. She stepped out from between two trees as if the forest had exhaled her, same sleek frame, same silence. The sun kissed the scar on her side, pale against the deep auburn of her coat. His breath hitched. She stood still, a dozen paces away, neither advancing nor retreating, just being. Tom didn't speak, didn't move. Their eyes met. Not fear, not dominance. Something else. Recognition, grace. He gave her a nod, quiet as prayer. She blinked once, then turned toward the deeper woods. One last glance. Then she vanished. Be still and know that I am God. She didn't stay. She didn't need to, she remembered, and now. So would he. This isn't just a story, it's a cry from the soul of nature. Tom returned again and again, always alone, always quiet. In the hush of the waking forest, he moved like a man carrying more than just supplies. He carried a silence that had taken root deep in his bones. The old pine tree waited for him like a sentinel, gnarled and enduring, the same tree under which he had once waited for her. The wounded bobcat who had stood over his broken body, not as a predator, but as a quiet witness to his pain. He never called her name, because she had no name. He never whistled, never searched the canopy. With longing eyes, he knew she wouldn't come like a pet. What passed between them was never about domestication or affection. It was something older, more sacred. Each time he came, he placed fresh meat in the shadow of the pine, wrapped in cloth like an offering at a shrine. Every morning after, Was gone, not hurriedly devoured, taken. With care, and always, she left signs. Delicate tracks in the snow, the faint curve of a body where she'd rested, as if the earth itself remembered her weight. Once, Tom found a single whisker caught on the bark, pale and fine like a strand of spirit, and it was enough. It filled the silence in him. As Scripture says, "Be still and know that I am God." In her absence, in her unseen presence, he found that same divine stillness, a quiet communion not built on words, but on reverence. Tom began offering more than just food. A worn glove from the days he spent splitting wood. A scrap of flannel from his wife's old shirt she used to hum while folding laundry, and sometimes Tom swore he still heard that melody in the wind. Once, he carved a small lynx from pine wood and left it under a rock near the tree. It was crude, nothing fancy, but his hands had shaped it with care. He didn't know if she noticed, but he needed to believe she did, because in giving these pieces of himself, he was slowly being put back together. His routine became more than ritual, it became anchor. He was no longer wandering, no longer sleepwalking through grief. The rhythm of giving, of returning, of watching the forest shift around her invisible orbit gave him purpose. A hawk would cry overhead, a rabbit would freeze mid-hop. The trees would quiet, and Tom would know she was near, even if unseen. In a world that prized noise and proof, she taught him to trust the unseen, the barely there. She became his silent gospel. As Job once whispered in the storm of suffering, "Speak to the earth, and it will teach you." Through her, through the forest, through the sacred hush left in her wake, Tom was learning again. Not about control or taming wild things, but about surrender. Winter melted into something softer. Spring arrived not with a roar, but with a breath, the kind that coaxes closed hearts to open again. The air was lighter, sweet with thaw, and pollen and the forest pulsed with new life. Snow still clung in the shadows, stubborn in its refusal to release, but the streams began to sing again. And so did Tom's heart, in its own quiet way. One morning, feeling stronger than he had. In months, he climbed higher than before. Every step was a declaration, "I'm still here." His leg ached, but it no longer felt like punishment. It felt like proof that he had survived, that she had survived. The trail narrowed and opened suddenly to a ridge that overlooked the yawning valley. The air shimmered. And then movement. Not the crashing chaos of deer or the careless flutter of birds. No, this was grace, subtle, measured, a shadow unfurling. She stepped into view like a secret returning home. The scar along her flank had faded, but Tom saw it, knew it. It was her shoulders rolled with strength, her eyes sharp as ever. But she was not alone. 3 kittens followed, clumsy, soft, awash in sunlight and wonder. They tumbled behind her, chasing leaves, pawing at ghosts, new to the world. And behind them trailed one, smaller, uncertain, the runt, perhaps. Tom's breath caught in his throat. She saw him. Their eyes locked across the wild breath of mountain air. She stood between her cubs and him, protective. But not afraid, not angry, just aware, as if saying, "I remember you." But they don't, so this is where we part. Tom didn't move. Didn't raise a hand, didn't even blink. A tear welled in. His eye slow and hot. "You made it," he whispered, the words barely wind. As Isaiah reminds us, "They that wait upon the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings as eagles." She had waited, and now she had risen. Not just as a survivor, but as a mother. She turned slowly, gathering her young with a gentle nudge and a glance, and vanished into the trees as silently as mist. No sound, no fanfare, just the brush of branches parting like a curtain. Tom stood there long after they were gone. The ridge wind tugged at his coat, but inside something burned bright. She had lived, against the odds, against the silence. And not only that, she had multiplied her survival. She had created life. And in that, she had given him something he never expected to find in this wilderness: faith. Faith that healing was possible, that grief could grow things, that even the broken could cradle new beginnings. He never saw her again. Not like that. But he didn't need to. That one moment, her eyes, her cubs, that sacred pause between predator and prey, between past and present, it stayed with him like a prayer. The forest knew them both, held both their scars, and somewhere between the pine needles and the mountain wind, her spirit lingered. Tom kept returning. Not to chase her, but to honor her. He brought food, sometimes flowers, sometimes nothing at all. Just his presence, just the knowing. And in that quiet space beneath the old pine, he let her memory bloom wild inside him. As Ecclesiastes says, to everything there is a season. A time to be born and a time to die. A time to keep and a time to let go. And now he let go, not of her, but of the grief. Because now he carried her not as pain, but as purpose. Every story here on Hope and Fur reminds us of the incredible power of compassion. Stories like Tom and the Bobcat aren't just emotional true stories. They're soul lessons in survival, resilience, and the unspoken wild bond between humans and animals. When you watch and share stories like this, you're doing more than just watching an emotional animal rescue video. You're helping support animal welfare, wildlife rehabilitation, and reminding the world that even one act of quiet kindness can ripple through generations. This isn't just a touching animal story. It's a testament to nature's grace, to wild survival, and to human healing. Every dramatic wildlife rescue begins with someone who chooses to care. Every voice matters. Every memory remembered. Keeps hope alive. One bobcat, one broken man. One forest that never forgot. Join us, share hope. Share fur, subscribe to Hope and Fur, where every story becomes a voice and every voice becomes hope.